Hello and welcome to another short video lecture for your economics course. This particular video is going to go over how to calculate out future GDP and what that can tell us. So the formula for future GDP, I'm going to go ahead and write that on the screen, is future GDP equals current GDP times 1 plus the growth rate to the number of years. So what we're looking at is if we grow at a constant growth rate, what would be GDP in a given amount of time? I'm going to go ahead and erase that and go through the problem with you, and then we'll be able to explain. Then I will explain a little bit more about what it means. So this particular problem states that the United States had an annual real GDP in 2018. And remember, real GDP means adjusted for inflation. So the purchasing power, real GDP in 2018 of 18.5 trillion. So that is our current GDP. I'm going to go ahead and write that right there as the variable we're going to use. Current GDP equals 18 trillion. And we want to know what the future GDP will be in 30 years at a constant growth rate of 3%. So our growth rate equals 3%. And what is our future GDP in given amount of years, number of years? And let me write that as equals 30, because that's the amount of years we are looking at, 30 years. And this growth rate, just so you know, anytime you have a growth rate that you plug back into a formula, unless it specifically says to use the percentage, you need to convert it into a decimal. So this would be 0.03 if I divide that by 100 to get my actual decimal. So 3% is the same as 0.3. So now I just plug it into my formula. So future GDP equals current GDP, 18.5 trillion, times 1 plus my growth rate of 0.03, that's that 3% growth rate, and the amount of time I'm looking at is 30 years. So this is 1.03 to the 30th power, which is the same as, and I'm going to round here. If you do it on a calculator, it may not be exactly the same, but it'll be close. I got 2.43 times that 18.5 trillion would give me a growth rate, or a GDP, I should say, of $44.96 trillion. So $44 trillion, almost $45 trillion in future growth, or future GDP, I should say. That would be 30 years from now, or 2018, in 2048, and you'd have at a constant growth rate. So if the economy grew, GDP grew at a constant growth rate of 3%, your future GDP would be 44.96 trillion. Well, let's look at what would happen if it grew at a smaller rate, so at 2%. So the same thing, except this time, current GDP, same thing, is it's a G. 5 trillion. Our growth rate this time is 2%, so 2% or 2 in a decimal form. The N number of years is the same thing. We want to compare it the same amount of time, 30 years. We plug in again our future GDP equal current GDP of 18.5 trillion times 1 plus 0.02 to the 30th power. This would be 1.02 to the 30th power times that $18.5 trillion. 18.5 times, and I got, let me do this real quickly. Once again, depending on how you round, it might be a little bit different. 1.81 is what I got. It would end up being a GDP equal to 33.49 trillion. So essentially, 33.5 trillion. I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth of a $1 trillion. So you're looking at billions here. Essentially, what you're looking at is the difference between the two, just by growing at a growth rate that's 1% less, ends up being almost $10 trillion difference. Why is that important? Well, if you think about it this way, if our economy is growing at a certain rate and our population is also growing at a certain rate, we need to maintain a growth rate that's fast enough just to maintain our quality of life, right? We're going to have more people that live longer. The population is going to grow. We need to replace roads. We need to replace infrastructure. We've got healthcare spending that's going to increase, etc. Well, as that overall population increases and the costs go up, inflation just goes up itself. If your GDP growth is not keeping up, your quality of life will actually stagnate. In other words, it will stall. And so that's why GDP growth is important. And the ways in which that we can increase this growth just kind of depend on what we're looking at and the aggregate production function, which you're going to learn about in this particular chapter. But we can increase the overall level of human capital, education, and skills per person, maybe increase the productivity rate per person by increasing infrastructure, physical capital, various things to that nature. But this is a good illustration of how GDP growth can affect you. When our economy shrinks and goes into a recession, then consumption goes down, unemployment goes up, and you have this vicious cycle. Well, if GDP over a long run doesn't increase at a fast enough rate with inflation and population, like I just said previously, then future generations are going to have a quality of life that's not as good as the one before. And we want to keep increasing the quality of life for our children and grandchildren. Well, that's been a short video, and hopefully it helped explain it. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. And as always, go Broncos.